$4 trillion. That's Apple. January 2025. Divide that by 8.1 billion people on Earth. Every human is worth $495 to Apple shareholders. Doesn't matter if you've never touched an iPhone. But 4 out of 5 people don't use Apple products, which means if you're an actual user, you're worth $2,900,000. Not what you paid, what Wall Street thinks they'll extract from you. Forever, stock jumped 3.4% in one day. $130 billion appeared, more than Hungary's entire GDP, in 6 hours. Here's the problem. Nobody's talking about that $4 trillion isn't money. It's a bet, a coordinated bet that Apple can keep extracting wealth from you, your kids, your grandkids, and the system holding it up is already cracking. 8.1 billion people, $4 trillion market cap, $495 per human, except 71% don't use Apple. So iPhone users, $2,900 each. Think about that math. You bought a $1,000 phone. Where's the other $1,900 coming from? Upgrades, 3 years, new iPhone, repeat forever. Subscriptions, iCloud when photos fill up, Apple Music, Apple TV Plus, $30 to $40 monthly, every month until you die. Accessories, AirPods, watch, iPad, MacBook, each one locking you deeper. App Store, 30% of everything. You pay higher prices, Apple collects the toll, but here's the genius part. You don't feel extracted. You feel premium, blue bubbles, seamless ecosystem, minimalist stores with employees who know your name. Apple didn't sell you products, they sold you an identity. According to consumer intelligence research partners, top 10% of Apple users spend over $10,000 lifetime, upgrading annually, buying every accessory, every service. Services revenue, $85.2 billion in 2024. Subscriptions, App Store fees, Apple Care, costs almost nothing to deliver. iPhone revenue, $200 billion, but manufacturing costs money, margins 38%, Apple keeps $76 billion profit, services, margins over 70%, Apple keeps $60 billion profit from $85 billion revenue, services generate almost same profit as iPhones, while costing fraction to deliver, services revenue up 16% year over year, iPhone only 6%. Wall Street sees recurring revenue, subscription everything, profit margins that would make cartels jealous, that $4 trillion valuation, not based on today's iPhone sales, based on subscription revenue they'll extract for decades. Here's what that $2,900 really means. Wall Street calculated your entire relationship with Apple, every future purchase, every subscription renewal, every accessory you'll buy because the ecosystem demands it. They're not valuing the phone in your hand. They're valuing your inability to leave. And the math gets worse when you look at actual spending patterns. Average Apple user replaces iPhone every 2.8 years, according to SERP data. At $1,000 per phone over 30 years, that's $10,714 in iPhones alone. Add Mac refresh every 5 years at $1,500 each. 6 purchases over 30 years, $9,000. iPad every 4 years at $600. 7 purchases, $4,200. Apple Watch every 3 years at $400. 10 purchases, $4,000. AirPods every 2 years at $200. 15 purchases, $3,000. Subscriptions at $35 monthly for 30 years, $12,600. Total, $43,514 per user over lifetime. But Wall Street only values you at $2,900. Because they're conservative, they're calculating probability-adjusted revenue. Not everyone stays locked in forever. Some people leave, some die. Some go broke. That $2,900 is the statistically expected value, the amount they're confident they can extract even accounting for defection, death, and default. Think about what that means. Wall Street is so certain of Apple's lock-in power that they're willing to bet $2,900 per user that you'll never escape. While you're paying $30 monthly subscriptions, Apple pays almost nothing in taxes. Ireland, 2016, 0.005%. Tax rate on European profits, not 5%, not 0.5%, 0.005%. How? Irish subsidiaries that weren't tax resident anywhere. Stateless companies, profit black holes. EU ordered Apple to pay 13 billion euros back taxes. Ireland refused to collect. Actually, fought in court to not receive 13 billion euros. Why, Apple threatened to leave. 6,000 jobs worse than 13 billion euros, apparently. The Irish tax scheme wasn't just creative accounting. It was systematic wealth theft from every country where Apple does business. Here's how it worked in practice. Apple sells iPhone in France. French customer pays 1,000 euros. That revenue gets booked to Apple's Irish subsidiary through transfer pricing. The Irish subsidiary pays licensing fees to another Irish entity that's not tax resident anywhere. Profit disappears. France gets minimal tax. Ireland gets minimal tax. Apple keeps almost everything. Multiply this across 170 countries. Billions in taxes evaporate annually. European Commission investigated for years. Found Apple's arrangement with Ireland constituted illegal state aid. Ireland had given Apple preferential treatment not available to other companies. The 13 billion euro ruling covered just 2003 to 2014. 11 years of tax avoidance. Apple should have paid way more over their entire history. But here's where it gets absurd. Ireland, the country owed the money, argued they didn't want it, said forcing Apple to pay back taxes would hurt Ireland's reputation as business-friendly. Translation, Ireland valued Apple's presence more than 13 billion euros in public funds. They'd rather maintain their status as a corporate tax haven than collect money owed to their citizens. Apple's lawyers argued the European Commission was overstepping, that only Ireland could decide Irish tax law, that the whole investigation was political. They won on technicality. Court ruled Commission hadn't proven Ireland gave Apple illegal advantage. Result, Apple kept 13 billion euros. Set precedent that tech companies can negotiate special tax deals with friendly governments. Other companies saw a roadmap for tax avoidance. Meanwhile, Ireland's corporate tax system remains essentially unchanged, still attracting companies through favorable treatment, still helping corporations avoid taxes they'd pay elsewhere. The 13 billion euro case wasn't about justice, it was about power, and Apple had more power than a sovereign nation. Apple won 2020, kept the money, paid nothing. $214 billion held offshore in 2017 to avoid U.S. taxes. Pure profit. Just sitting there. U.S. corporate rate, 35%. Apple should have owed $75 billion. Paid almost nothing. Tech companies collectively, over $1 trillion offshore, $350 billion in avoided taxes. $350 billion could fund universal pre-K for a decade, rebuild every bridge in America, eliminate medical debt for 18 million people. Instead, sits in Cayman Islands while politicians claim government is broke. But here's what makes this disgusting. iPhone technology came from public funding. 2017, Trump's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, repatriation holiday, bring offshore money back at 15.5% instead of 35%. Apple brought back $252 billion, paid $38 billion, still avoided 50 billion plus billion. What did Apple do? Build American factories, raise wages, stock buybacks, over $100 billion in buybacks 2018 to 2020, took tax savings meant to create jobs, funneled directly to shareholders, created zero jobs, touch screens, university research funded by NSF and CIA, GPS, U.S. military, billions in Department of Defense, Internet, DARPA, government project, Siri, DARPA-funded AI research, lithium batteries, Department of Energy research, Apple took publicly funded innovation, privatized it, built $4 trillion monopoly, now avoids paying back into system that made them possible. Foxconn, Apple's main manufacturer, makes most iPhones. 2010, 14 workers killed themselves, jumped from factory dorms within months. Foxconn's response: install nets to catch jumpers, not improve conditions, catch bodies. Apple's response: deeply troubled statement, production continued. Supply chain isn't designed for worker welfare. It's designed for cost minimization. Workers during peak periods, 60 to 80-hour weeks, sleep in cramped dorms, 8 to 12 people per room, earn $3,000 to $3,500 hourly. You buy iPhone at Apple Store, clean, minimalist, zen, friendly staff, Foxconn factory where it was made, 230,000 workers, military discipline, bathroom inspections, talking prohibited, sitting prohibited. Two different worlds, connected by supply chain nobody examines. Cobalt mining, Congo, Amnesty International documented children as young as 7, hand-digging tunnels, carrying 40-kilogram bags, $1 to $2 daily. Apple claims cleaned up supply chain, but investigations keep finding problems. 2022, Chinese suppliers still using forced labor, Uyghur workers, Apple knew, did nothing for months. Why? Switching suppliers is expensive. Cuts into those beautiful 38% margins. Congolese child mining cobalt doesn't benefit from Apple's $4 trillion. Ghanaian worker burning e-waste doesn't see that wealth. Chinese worker assembling iPhones for $3 hourly doesn't get stock options, but Tim Cook does. 2023 compensation: $63,200,000, $7,212 per hour. Chinese Foxconn worker would need 10 years to earn what Cook makes in 1 hour. Not you, not workers, not communities, shareholders. Vanguard, 8.7%, worth $348 billion. BlackRock, 6.4%, worth $256 billion. Berkshire Hathaway, 5.8%, worth $232 billion. Three entities control over 20%, $836 billion concentrated. Federal Reserve data: top 10% of Americans own 89%. Of all stocks, top 1% own 54%. When Apple's market cap increases $1 trillion, $890 billion goes to wealthiest 10%, $540 billion to wealthiest 1%, bottom 50% own less than 1% of stocks. CNBC celebrates $4 trillion. They're celebrating wealth concentration, not shared prosperity. Tim Cook's net worth, $2 billion from stock. Median Apple Store employee, probably negative with student loans and debt, making $17 to $22 hourly in expensive cities like San Francisco, New York, Los Angeles. Apple sits on $162 billion cash, more than Ukraine's GDP, more than Hungary. One company has more liquid wealth than entire countries. What do they do with it? Stock buybacks, past decade, over $550 billion buying back their own shares, reduces shares available, makes remaining shares more valuable, makes shareholders richer, doesn't create jobs, doesn't raise wages, doesn't invest in products, Pure wealth extraction, Oxfam. 2024 report, richest 1%, accumulated $42 trillion new wealth over past decade. Tech stocks drove most of that. Meanwhile, teacher salaries stagnate. Infrastructure crumbles. Healthcare bankrupts families. Housing becomes unaffordable. Not because society lacks wealth, because wealth concentrates in $4 trillion market caps benefiting vanishingly few. Wealth becomes political power. Apple's 2023 lobbying, $8,700,000, direct lobbying. Doesn't count indirect influence. What does that buy? Meetings with regulators before rules get written, input on legislation before it's proposed, EU proposed USB-C charging, Apple fought for years, eventually lost, U.S. states proposed right-to-repair laws, Apple lobbied against every single one, won in most states. Congress discussed antitrust reform, Apple spent record amounts, legislation stalled, EU fined Apple 13 billion euros, Apple fought 8 years through courts, won 2020. They didn't win because they were right. They won because they could afford better lawyers longer than EU could sustain fight. Small countries can't fight trillion-dollar companies. Even large countries struggle. Corporate sovereignty. Tech companies become de facto nations. Own rules, own currencies, own territories, own citizens. You can vote out government. Can't vote out Tim Cook. Apple hosts economic summits. Tim Cook meets senators. Not lobbying, dialogue. Apple threatens to move jobs from states considering regulations. Not bribe. Business concerns, revolving door. Former regulators become tech lobbyists. Former politicians become consultants. $4 trillion isn't just stock price, it's political war chest. Every dollar translates to borrowing power, lobbying budgets, ability to outlast regulatory pressure. Standard Oil controlled 90% of oil refining, but you could use their oil in any car. Apple controls entire stack, hardware, software, services, app distribution, payment processing. Even what apps you're allowed to install. Try to install app. Apple doesn't approve. Can't do it. Not without jailbreaking and voiding warranty. Try to repair iPhone at non-Apple shop. They make it difficult. Serialize parts, software lock components, fight right-to-repair laws in every state. Try to use non-Apple charger. They lobbied against universal charging for years. EU finally forced USB-C in 2024. Complete ecosystem control. Switching costs are astronomical. Leave iPhone for Android. First, iMessages stop working. Blue bubbles turn green. Group chats break. Videos compressed and unwatchable. Your friends notice. Why are you on Android? Your messages are ruining group chat. Social pressure becomes switching cost. Second, Apple Watch stops working entirely. $400 plus device, worthless, only works with iPhone, AirPods, technically work with Android but lose half the features. Seamless switching, gone. Automatic ear detection, gone. MacBook, can't text from computer. Can't make phone calls from laptop. AirDrop doesn't work. Continuity features gone. Apple didn't just sell you phone. They sold you interconnected system where removing any piece makes rest less valuable. Economics calls this vendor lock-in. Normal people call it being trapped, and trap is generational. Kids grow up with iPads in schools, get iPhones as teenagers, graduate to MacBooks in college, enter workforce using Apple devices, raise kids who repeat cycle. Apple's education pricing isn't charity, it's customer acquisition. Get them young, lock them in for life. Lifetime value of customer who starts with Apple at age 12 and stays until 80. Potentially $100,000 plus. Lütfen metnin geri kalanını gönderin, aynı kuralı uygulamaya devam edeceğim. Multiple iPhones, multiple MacBooks, multiple iPads, multiple watches, multiple subscriptions, For 68 years, that's what Wall Street sees when they value Apple at $4 trillion, not today's sales, tomorrow's captive customers. Every period of extreme wealth concentration ended in crisis. 1920s led to Great Depression. 1890s, Gilded Age led to trust busting. We're at wealth concentration levels not seen since 1929. Question isn't whether this is sustainable. Obviously isn't. Question is what breaks first. Social instability, when people can't afford housing or health care while watching trillion-dollar market caps, they stop playing by rules, political backlash, populism rising globally, future elections might actually regulate, economic collapse, wealth concentration kills consumer demand, can't have growth if nobody has money, environmental catastrophe, can't mine from dead planet, can't sell iPhones during climate collapse or maybe nothing breaks. This becomes permanent. Tech monopolies forever, wealth concentration forever, environmental destruction forever. Systems Apple built aren't unique, being replicated everywhere. Netflix wants subscription lock-in, Amazon wants marketplace control, Google wants data extraction, Microsoft wants enterprise dependence. Every successful company studies Apple's playbook: create ecosystem, generate lock-in, extract maximum value, avoid taxes, lobby regulators, new form of capitalism that abandoned shared prosperity, break up vertical integration. Apple makes hardware or controls software or runs App Store. Not all three. AT&T breakup 1984 created 7 companies. All thrived. Competition increased. Break Apple into device company, software company, services company. Force them to compete. Real tax reform. Close offshore loopholes. Minimum global corporate tax. 25% minimum. Strictly enforced. Applied to global revenues. Mandate interoperability. Your data is yours. Switching should be frictionless. EU requires this starting 2024, but Apple maliciously complying, making technically possible but practically difficult. Massive fines, 20% of global revenue per violation. But implementation requires political will. Political will requires public pressure, which means you contact representatives, support regulators trying to rein in tech, vote for candidates who will actually regulate. Stop celebrating market caps like their success, their extraction. $4 trillion will keep growing. $5 trillion, $10 trillion. Wall Street will celebrate each one. Every celebration represents increased extraction, tighter lock-in, more wealth concentrated, more environmental damage, more exploited workers until something breaks. Maybe antitrust movement with teeth, maybe consumer rebellion, maybe economic collapse, but something will break, always does. People who survive aren't ones who bought stock and hoped or ignored it and pretended everything was fine. Survivors saw pattern clearly, understood unsustainability, positioned accordingly. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes with brutal precision. Right now, it's rhyming with 1929, with Gilded Age excess. With every period where wealth concentration hit breaking points. If this opened your eyes to what $4 trillion really represents, not success but extraction, not innovation but exploitation, share it, subscribe. We're running out of time to reform this peacefully. Check description for sources, legislation you can support, representatives you can contact. This isn't about hating Apple. It's recognizing when system has become fundamentally predatory, and doing something before inevitable collapse destroys everything. The $4 trillion is here. The reckoning is coming. Only question is whether we shape it or it shapes us.